Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of EDST 2450. Uh, this is Piaget. Welcome to Piaget with Professor Denobili. It is 8:30 here in New York, 6:30 in Wyoming. It is September 20th, 2022, the last full day of summer, and let's get to it. There are a series of videos in this particular presentation. Instead of playing through them all, I'm just going to tell you you could pause the presentation and play them. If you go back to the presentation, I want to keep this particular video as short as we can this week. So this is a nice summary video of Piaget's entire theory. This week, exam number 1 is open. The guide that I posted last week is going to be very helpful. I highly suggest that you do the guide first, take notes, and then take the exam. I highly recommend that. We're going to look at the roadmap on the next page, and we're going to look at Piaget. So here we're on the bottom left, nature on the left, nurture on the right. Piaget and his stages. He's our first stage theorist. He sets the stage for stage theorists, pun intended. He's also here under the ethologists. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Let's just move on. So Piaget, stage theories are good but flawed. Let's keep that in mind. As we learned last week with Werner, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's going to be important when we're going through individual theories as well as when we're looking at stage theories. They're good, but they're not going to be 100% all the time. I'm going to look at Werner in a second as we move down as well. Some people place Vygotsky over Piaget. When we get to Vygotsky, you'll see why. I would say the two pillars of 20th century learning theory are Piaget and Vygotsky. If you don't know Piaget and Vygotsky, you're kind of fallen short in the 20th century. As I asked you last week, consider why you think this all matters and why you should care. And as pre-service teachers, you're encouraged to meet your students where they're at. So Piaget kind of provides a series of steps to let you know where your children are at. And stage theories give you a solid theoretical place from which to start that assessment. Coming back to Werner and Gestalt theory, the whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. And this goes with like all theories in general. Sometimes we need to be multi-theoretical. We need to approach things with more than one theory because each individual theory may not hold true 100% of the time. Piaget is an example of that, and we'll see as we go through. There is a level of universality to Piaget, but not 100% of the time. The big takeaways: know the stages and the rough age boundaries. I highly recommend you memorize it, partly because I was forced to memorize it when I was in college. So if I was tortured, you have to be tortured too. Now, knowing the stages and the rough age boundaries, especially from an academic point of view, it's good to know. It's good to know where they're at. Sometimes the boundaries are often blurred and they overlap with each other because children are apt to demonstrate behavior. That's what the BX is short for, behavior from an earlier stage well into the next. So, and it's kind of logical that way. Children are going to build on what they already know. So the former stage doesn't disappear. It's not like all of a sudden they go into the new stage and all of a sudden everything they had in the former stage is just gone. They're building off of what they developed in that previous stage. Think of the theories, as I said before, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Think of these theories as like tools in your toolbox. Um, so like you can look for Piagetian behavior in the kids in your life. Um, he may not be 100%, but at least Piaget gives us a vocabulary of when we see something in front of us, and you'll see when we get to the stages themselves. Key ideas from Piaget. Remember that Piaget is an example of the organismic theory. I'm getting that word little by little. Man is not a machine, man is an organism. Children are active, motivated learners. Very big with Piaget. Children naturally organize what they experience into schemes or schemas and operations. Very key to understanding Piaget as well. And then we have assimilation and accommodation. Children adapt to the environment through assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is fitting new information into a current schema. So, for example, if a child experiences a cat and the child now has cat schema, everything with 4 legs and has fur is a cat. The first time they see a dog, the kid most likely will say, "Mommy, that's a big cat." The dog is a cat. That's assimilation. Accommodation is revising or abandoning the schema to account for new information. So, for example, let's say they're corrected, or they start noticing the subtle differences between the dogs and the cats. They now have to abandon the cat schema and now create. Remember, schema is like digital folders in the brain. Now there needs to be a dog schema. That's accommodation for this new piece of information. Now we have the dog folder and everything that goes into the dog folder. And then, the next thing they go to the zoo and they see a bear. And they, "Mommy, that's a big dog." Like, no, it's a bear. And now they need a new schema for the bear schema. And then, as if that wasn't hard enough, then when kids come into contact with different breeds of the same animal, like a golden retriever and a dachshund and a bloodhound, now they have to understand nuances and accommodate that schema over and over and over again. And that's learning. That's learning in a nutshell. Is it an oversimplification? Yes. But as I said before, at least it provides vocabulary that we can use to understand how learning occurs, even if it doesn't happen exactly in that process. But I would say that the very least, Piaget provides a basic understanding of how we can put together cognitive development that transposes into behavioral development. Even though, as we're going to see at the end of this presentation, there are things that we've learned since Piaget to further clarify his theory. Very key to Piaget is the interaction with the physical environment. It's absolutely critical. Montessori was ahead of Piaget in this regard, but he's continuing that practice. The child has to be free to interact with the environment through the child's natural curiosity. Kids get to walk around, they get to bang on things of their choosing, they get to interact. Interaction with others is critical too. It's very socially oriented. And we'll see this as well when we get between the egocentric part of his theory and how children move away from egocentrism. Children think in qualitatively different ways at different age levels. And that's the key word, qualitatively, descriptively. It doesn't mean, one of the things that Piaget was, I will say, incomplete with is that babies were actually a lot smarter than he originally theorized. And they're not illogical. They may not be scientific, but they're not illogical. I did a test this weekend with my 4-year-old niece. Her name is Gianna, and I asked Gianna. I did the alive test. What is alive? Um, and I asked her, "Is the sun alive?" And she said no. And then I asked her, "Is the TV alive?" And she said no. I said, "Is the tree alive?" She said no. Uh, is Roscoe the dog, the family dog, is he alive? She said yes. And she said that her sisters, Natalie and Teresa, were alive. And I asked her, why is the sun, the TV, and the tree not alive? And she said, because they don't have eyes. Okay, interesting. Not necessarily scientific, but it's logical. And then I asked her, well, what about the picture on the wall over there of your sister Teresa? It has eyes. Is it alive? And she said, no. And I said, why? And she said, because the eyes are very small, and in order to be alive, the eyes have to be big. I it makes sense to her. It may not make sense to me, but there's some level of logic there. She's at least putting something together. She's putting something together there in her definition of what it means to be alive. And it just, she just thinks qualitatively different than, let's say, my older niece, who I asked her, is the sun alive? And she said no. And then I asked her, is the tree alive? I said yes. And I said, why? She goes, because it's a living thing. So she's more scientific at age 12. She's in 7th grade now. She has more of a scientific understanding of the world and her definition of what it means to be alive than my 4-year-old niece. I didn't have a chance to ask Teresa because she was the middle child. She was running all over the place, as we learned earlier in one of the earlier presentations. As teachers, we got our students and introduced them to problems. I comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. I believe that was a Piaget quote, but I could look it up and I'll post it on the presentation notes to see what it is. I think that's a Piaget quote, but I could be wrong. Equilibration is the process. It leads to increasingly complex thought. Disequilibrium results from mismatch between the schemas and information. And then equilibrium is the goal state, the result of reorganizing and replacing schemas. So when we start learning things, there's a little bit of disequilibrium, but we start the process of equilibration in order to create complex thought. Stages are hierarchical, and we're going to see in one of the upcoming pictures. And we think they're universal, meaning regardless of culture, regardless of class, regardless of geographic location. So stages are universal with an asterisk. And the 4 basic stages are sensory motor, pre-operations, concrete operations, and formal operations. I'm going to go more in depth, so I'm not going to touch upon the details just yet. So here we go. Here's that little diagram that I said that I was going to give you. So for Piaget, it's a continuum. Each movement, each advancement, each construction or reconstruction equals more capability or capacity for qualitatively different reasoning. As we said before, there is overlap between the stages. And just because like, for example, the formal operations, just because they're up here, doesn't mean they no longer have sensory motor skills. Like, just think about that for a second. Like, we can think, but we can't move our body. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's like these former stages still remain. So in a way, like, these are the formal development of these stages, But the reality is that sensory motor should really be the whole way through, because we don't give up on our sensory motor skills just because we've finished developing them. We're just not formally developing them anymore. That's what's going on here. And we may not be formally developing them, but we may be um, fine tuning them as we get older. Improvement in reasoning permeates a child's total reasoning. As we said before, note the overlaps. Um, and the formal operational is enhanced by schooling. So this is where, because the reality is that school begins somewhere around here, somewhere around here. And so from pre-K to middle school, which is about here, you can't do too much in the realm of academia, but there's so much you can do in these formative years. But when we get to the formal operational level in middle school, it can be enhanced by schooling with the right teachers, with the right teaching style. Um, and I'm going to leave that open ended because I have my opinion of what the right teaching style is, but other people have different opinions of what the right teaching style is. So I'll just leave it at that. So the sensory motor stage starts from birth to age 2, and notice the squiggly line. These aren't hard fast age groups. It's about age 2. It begins with reflexes and sensory motor schemes or schemas, hence the name of the stage. Goal directed behavior emerges. Object permanence emerges. Remember, object permanence is when the child can realize that an object remains in existence even after they can no longer see it. And then symbolic thought emerges, words, language. And when that starts happening, when they start talking around the age of 2, it's a transition into the new stage. These tables are here for you for your reference. I'm not going to go through them because you all know how to read. I'm just going to move on to save time for this lecture. So at your own pace, you can come back and look at the sub stages or the sub periods within each stage. The end of the sensory motor stage is when the toddler can eternally set goals and carry them out through behavior and sees objects and others as separate from him or herself. So once the child realizes that there's other people who exist in the world, notice that's when they begin to go to school. Because you can start teaching young people once they realize that they are not the only individuals that exist in the universe. Some people become adults and they never get past this stage. That's a whole nother story. Anyway, pre-operational. The child is fooled by his perceptions. At the beginning of the stage, perceptions which override facts. The child cannot reverse think, reason about transformations, or decenter thought processes, and thus does not conserve. We're going to talk about conservation in a second. They develop symbolic representation using words to represent something else, using images to represent something else. They can understand the difference between a tree, a picture of a tree, and the word tree. They can start to differentiate between the three. Limited mental manipulation or operations. They're limited operations, so therefore they're pre-operational. Egocentrism is still active. They're thinking of everything from their own point of view, and there's failure to conserve. Conservation is the ability to translate different things to different situations. The example that Piaget often did was 2 cups of water. They're the same size cup, so the child knows they're equal. You pour the water into a different size cup, but fill it up with the same amount of water. The child is not able to know the difference between the two pieces of the two items of water. Similar in process, I've seen it, is the dollar bill sequence. You give a child a $1 bill and a $20 bill, and oftentimes they'll choose the $1 bill. And I've heard different reasons, but the reason I've heard most often is that they see the $1 bill most often, and therefore they think it's more valuable. And that's why they go for the $1 bill because they see it all the time. Because they don't understand they don't understand value of money. And if we want to be very cynical, the value is exactly the same. It's printed on paper. A $1 bill is the same type of paper as a $20 bill. We as a society, through economics, have created different values for different dollar bills. But a $100 bill is worth the same amount in terms of the value of the paper it's printed on and the ink that's used to print it as a $1 bill. We've just assigned different value to it. But a child doesn't know the difference between the two. Um, some of the pre-operational sub periods, you can look at that in your own time. The end of the pre-operational stage is the child can reason based on factual information. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 and 8 will have to wait. I remember that song. But anyway, they can start to think a little bit more abstractly. It's still very concrete, but they can start to think and reason with more factual information. The child can reverse think. They can start to work things backwards in their heads. They can reason about transformation, things converting into different things. If a ball rolls under a couch, they're able to follow the trajectory, and they can decenter their thought processes. It's not all about them anymore. They can start to realize that there's others out there, and they can start to conserve at the end of this stage. They're no longer fooled between the water or if you've ever seen the ones, especially with the dogs, the videos with the dogs with the little one dog treat and the 5 dog treats, and they move the cup around. That's also a form of conservation. The concrete operation stage is ages 7 to 11. The child at the beginning of the stage can solve logical problems through manipulation of concrete objects, but cannot reason about hypothetical, verbal, abstract, or problems with many variables. They can conserve in the concrete stage, but their thinking is very concrete. I can tell you, as an English teacher, it's very difficult to teach literature in middle school because the child cannot really process at an abstract level things dealing with figurative language. Figurative language is very difficult for a middle school student because they're still concrete thinkers. And so, in order to teach them symbolism and other forms of figurative language like metaphor, you have to really use physical pictures and concrete objects in order for them to really wrap their head around it. So if I say that, you know, he runs as fast as a cheetah, a 6th grader may be a little bit confused because they're thinking that the man is a cheetah, not that he's running so fast. And so you really have to break it down for them because they're concrete thinkers. Okay, the man is running, but how fast is he running? Is he running really fast or really slow? And then you just take it step by step with them. Even though it's a little annoying because you have to really break it down for them, they'll start to realize, oh, as fast, they're running really fast because cheetahs run really fast. And they're being compared. Oh, the man's not the cheetah. He's being compared to a cheetah. So that's just the English teacher in me. Oftentimes we think of concrete operations in terms of mathematics, but it's also important to understand it in the other subject matters. The concrete operations, the sub periods, you can look at that on your own time. The child can solve logical problems without the aid of concrete objects and can begin to reason about abstract hypothetical problems. This is the transition out of the concrete operations and into the formal operations stage. Abstract and scientific reasoning, as you um, around age 11, and moving on. As I said before, at the middle school stage, um, they're starting to get some abstract thought, but you really have to lead them through it. You really need to show them a little bit of concreteness in those middle school years while you're teaching them that abstract thought. They can understand hypothetical ideas. They can understand contrary to fact ideas, and they're more idealistic. You start to talk to a middle school student, they say the weirdest things. They really do. And they have this really, you know, it's interesting. I was talking about this with one of the school consultants. You sit with middle school and high school students long enough, and you're like, man, they they can solve world hunger, they can solve, world peace. You know, they got it all. They know how to figure out everything when it comes to the big problems of the world, because they haven't been, this is a cynical way of looking at it, they haven't been tainted by the world yet. And so because they don't know the complexities of everything in the world, there tends to be this high level of idealism that's with them that, you know, I personally think, this is me as, Michael speaking, we kind of like take away from them when they get to high school, because we we give them literature where, everyone dies. That's it, guys. What do you have to look forward to? You're gonna die. Period. The end. I remember I taught a class 3 years in a row, and they let me know that from sophomore year to senior year, every book there was an individual who died, and they gave me the body count of how many characters died. And it's like we ripped that away from them in high school, and it's very sad. But that's just my personal opinion on that. Sub periods for the formal operations stage. Current perspectives on Piaget. Research supports the sequencing. Research supports that his stages are legit, for lack of better terms. But research does not support the sharp age boundaries. New research is showing that infants can demonstrate object permanence as early as 2.5 months. Preschoolers aren't always as egocentric and can demonstrate conservation and class inclusion. Some elementary students exhibit abstract reasoning, and some high school students never develop abstract reasoning. The other limitation of Piaget is that he was a white man in a white society from a middle and upper class subgroup, so population. And those were the types of children that he was studying. Now, with that said, as more and more studies are done to test Piaget's theory, as I said before, there seems to be more universality between races and classes than was questioned before. They questioned Piaget because he only worked with white, middle, and upper class children. But as more and more studies are done, it may not be exactly as Piaget said, but the studies are showing that there is more universality than previously questioned. Knowledge, experience, and culture do affect reasoning abilities. Conservation may be taught. We thought before that conservation was like inborn, like you either knew it or you didn't know it. You had to mature into it. But we're studies are showing that it can be taught. Children at ages 4 or 5 exhibit conservation after experiencing it. Prior knowledge affects formal operations, and education and culture affects cognitive development. So while there's a universality to the stages, education and culture does affect cognitive development and the connected behavior associated with it. Cognitive development may not be universally stage like, as is behavior. The relevance of Piaget's ideas, they provide opportunities for children to play and experiment, similarly as Montessori. They explore children's reasoning, problem solving with different activities and questions. That's like the fun side of Piaget. Um, as I said before, with the stages, keep them in mind, but they're not, they're guides. They're guides, they're not rules. So don't think that just because a child is in a certain age group that he or she is necessarily going through that stage. So you don't take them literally, but as I said before, it provides a common vocabulary that we just don't have, but we have thanks to Piaget. Present situation ideas that children cannot easily explain using existing knowledge and beliefs. That we want to challenge them, we want to push them. Use familiar content and tasks when asking children to reason in sophisticated ways. So in elementary school, to teach them mathematical skills, we may use blocks because kids know blocks. They know how many blocks it takes to build certain objects with the blocks. So now we're going to teach them 1 + 1 = 2 by taking one block and another block and putting it together. Now we got 2 blocks. So because they're in that concrete mode, and even though they'll be able to use the numbers later on, they can't do it just yet. You can't give them a sheet of paper in pre-K and say, okay, kids, you're going to use the number 1 + 1, and it's going to equal 2. Let's go memorize it. They just don't think that way. They don't work that way. Plan group activities in which young people share their beliefs and perspectives, even in the younger years, even in elementary school. The thing about the egocentrism is that, as it said in the textbook, oftentimes the children see their parents and they assume the rules are the rules and that's it, because their parents are very egocentric, but because they have to listen to mommy and daddy. But when they go into a classroom with other children, they can start experimenting with thoughts and ideas because they don't have to listen to the kid who's 2 desks down from them. They can argue with them. And the thing about children is that they'll argue and then they'll be best friends the next day because they don't hold grudges like adults do. You know, I'm on a movie group on Facebook and I'll have debates with grown adults about movies. We're talking about movies and we'll have debates. I'm thinking, oh, it's a simple debate. That's it. 2 months later, I'll be on a thread and the person's coming back and they're attacking me for something that I had said. Like, dude, we were talking about The Little Mermaid. Calm down. We were talking about a cartoon movie. It's like, don't take it personal. But children, high school students are a little bit different, but elementary students, for the most part, they'll have an argument and best friends. Best friends. I don't know how that works, but it works. It works for them. Coming attractions. Exam 1 is due on Sunday. Next week, we're going to be doing Kohlberg and Moral Development, Chapter 7. And the following week is Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner, our behaviorists. We're going to be moving into the nurture side of the roadmap in Chapter 8. I hope that was short. I was shooting for about 30 minutes. And I think I got about 30 minutes. So I hope I did. That's all I have to say about that. If you have questions, text me on GroupMe, email me. and I hope you enjoy your week. I'm going to Washington D.C. this weekend. I'm leaving Thursday night, um, and I hope to read Kohlberg earlier, and I hope to post Kohlberg Friday, Saturday instead of early next week. Uh, so I feel like I'm getting better. So we'll see. Enjoy your week, guys. I hope everything is great over in Wyoming. I hope you're all safe, and I'll talk to you soon on GroupMe.